Hey, this is Stacy from Let's Cook Y'all. Welcome to our channel if you're new, and if you're a returning subscriber, thanks for stopping by. We hope you're here looking for some ideas for breakfast at your house. This video has 17 recipes for ideas from things that run the gamut, from basics like homemade pancakes and waffles to ideas for oatmeal, fun things like casseroles, Dutch babies, muffins. We tried to offer a variety of ways to cook things. People are always asking for different ideas. So there's items in this for breakfast that you can cook on your stovetop, your oven, in a crock pot, in an Instant Pot, or your air fryer. We hope you like the recipes in this video and you get a chance to serve them for yourself, for your family, for someone coming over for brunch, someone spending the night and you need a quick casserole for the next morning for breakfast. We hope you enjoy all the food in this video. Thanks so much for stopping by. To make pancakes from scratch, if you don't have a mix and you don't have Bisquick, which we often do, the ingredients you'll need are flour, a little bit of sugar, some melted butter, vanilla, baking powder, an egg, some salt, and milk. So this is how we make homemade pancakes without a mix. Mix up the dry ingredients first. You'll need 1.5 cups of flour, 3.5 teaspoons of baking powder, about 3/4 teaspoon of salt, or less, that's to your preference, a tablespoon of white sugar. You want to sift together the dry ingredient. In my case, I don't have a sifter, so I'm going to use a whisk. Combine them really well. I'm going to make a well in the center to add the wet ingredients. 1 1/4 cups of milk, 3 tablespoons of melted butter, an egg. Because I like things sweet, I add a dash of vanilla. If it had a cap that was removable, I would just use a cap full. I'm going to use about 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon. A few lumps are okay. We're going to let the batter rest for about 3 to 5 minutes while we preheat the griddle.
This is going to be awesome.
Melt some butter on your griddle and then drop them out by about 1/4 cup measures. Every person's stove is a little different. Every cooking vessel, griddle that you use is a little different. A cast iron will get a lot hotter. I actually cook mine on about a medium low. You want the bubbles to start forming, but to me, with my combination, even when the bubbles start forming, they're still not ready to flip. So I usually take my spatula and just check the edges, and when they're brown enough, I flip them. They've risen, they're starting to get brown on the other side, so I'll flip them. Let them cook on the second side. And just keep going with the 1/4 cup measure. I usually get about 6 to 8 pancakes this size. You can of course add blueberries or chocolate chips or whatever you like to your homemade pancakes. Going to make us some buttermilk waffles. This is my base recipe that I usually use. Works really well. I have 1 cup of regular buttermilk and I took the other 1/2 cup and soured it with lemon juice. So 1 1/2 cups of buttermilk, 1 3/4 cup all-purpose flour, 4 eggs, 4 tablespoons of melted butter, and we're going to mix the eggs and the buttermilk and the butter and the dry ingredients with the 1 3/4 cup of flour is 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda, a tablespoon each of baking powder and sugar, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and surprisingly, my original recipe does not call for vanilla, but I always add it. Mix up the wet ingredients. As I said, I only had 1 cup of regular buttermilk. I have tried making this recipe before by souring all of the milk. It does not work as good. You need some pure whole buttermilk, but you mix the wet ingredients together, the eggs, the butter, and the buttermilk. Mix the dry ingredients in a separate container, combine them, and then put them on a sprayed hot waffle iron. I also use a 1/4 cup measure here. Every waffle iron's different, but this works for mine, and they take about 4 to 5 minutes, and they come out nice, brown, and crispy. Today I'm going to make some super easy, simple 3-ingredient waffles. You mix up Bisquick, some vegetable or canola oil, and ginger ale, which makes them very light and fluffy. The waffles are really easy. We put in 2 cups of Bisquick. We're going to put in 2 or maybe 3 tablespoons of oil, and then 1.5 cups of ginger ale. Mix it really well. This does need to sit for about 5 to 10 minutes to let the batter come together before you start putting it in the hot waffle iron. After about 5 or 6 minutes, it should be thick and bubbly. If you do have a Cuisinart griddler like I do, I use setting griddle, temperature 400, and I've turned it to on to preheat it. When it goes green, we will spray the, even though they're non-stick, we'll spray the waffle plates and add the batter. The next recipe is for a Dutch baby. I've also heard it called a German pancake or a puffy pancake. The most important thing about this is you need a cast iron skillet in the oven getting hot. I put my 10-inch in there at 425 and let it preheat the entire time so it is screaming hot. I've listed the ingredients and the amounts on the screen. I basically combined 2 recipes, one from Pioneer Woman and one from a website called Little Luna. For my 10-inch cast iron pan, I combined equal parts flour and milk. I used 1/2 cup of each, then 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a dash of cinnamon and vanilla, and then 3 beaten eggs. I did go ahead and chill my batter while I was getting the cast iron pan preheated in the oven till that baby was screaming hot. Oh, that sucker's hot. Put the butter in the batter. That's a lot of butter. I don't know if it needs that much butter or not. I think it's brown butter now. Bake at 425 for 15 minutes. It's puffed up. We're going to lower the temperature to 300 and cook an extra 5 minutes. Oh, it may have burned. Oh no, tell me it didn't burn.
It didn't burn.
It didn't burn. Yay. Alrighty, Dutch baby. It's a Dutch baby. Puffy pancake, German pancake, whatever you want to call it.
It's climbing.
Yeah, it's gonna deflate in a second. Put some, I think it's too much butter. I kind of combined 2 recipes. I think it has too much butter in it.
Well, what do you do? Just eat it out of the...
We're gonna cut it, slice it like a pie. I've got berries and syrup and all this powdered sugar. I'm just gonna go whole hog. You wanna cut it for me? You got the mitts still on.
Sure.
I love it when Tim's home and he can help cook. Awesome.
Cut it like a pie?
Cut it like a pie, just don't burn yourself. They're hot. That cast iron pan's been in there almost an hour. As I'm sure you could tell by the time on the stove, we had this for dinner. We do breakfast for dinner a lot. This one was delicious. To be honest, I probably would not go to this much trouble in the morning, but it was great. We served it with some powdered sugar, some berry, some scrambled eggs with cheese, and I'm going to show you next how we did air fryer twisted bacon. I did read some stuff online and knew that the big deal was if you do one batch and then try a second one, you need to be sure to get all the grease out. You don't want to cause a fire. So I did do that. And to do something fun and different, I saw a couple different ways. One was to take some metal or wooden skewers and kind of skewer it up ribbon-wise. I decided to try to twist mine. I was doing them one at a time. Tim walked in and said, I can twist a lot faster with my method. So he got in there and helped me. We twisted up bacon and I did 2 batches in the air fryer. We're going to try it at 400. We're going to start at 5 minutes and then check it every minute or 2 and see if it takes maybe 8 or 10. See how it does. Five minutes, it looks about half done. I'm gonna check it at 8. And then that's 8 minutes at 400. We haven't flipped them yet. We may try flip them in 1 or 2 more minutes. I like crispy bacon. Do you like crispy bacon?
I like crispy bacon.
I like really crispy bacon. 9 minutes at 400. Little twisty bacon. I'm going to see if I can let it cool for a minute and clean the grease out from underneath the basket and do another batch. This worked great. Just be sure and clean the grease out between batches. Next up is an easy overnight breakfast casserole. You can easily cut this in half. I did make the full size to take somewhere. I took a pound of breakfast sausage. I used the Jimmy Dean brand, browned it on the stovetop, drained it. I took in a bowl 8 eggs and beat those and added my seasonings, which was some dry mustard powder and salt and pepper. Then you add 2.5 cups of milk, or you can use half and half. I took a 9 by 13 Pyrex, sprayed it really well with nonstick cooking spray, and then laid out my 6 pieces of bread. This one is also easily halved. You just cut everything in half and use an 8 by 8. Then you take the sausage that you've drained really well. That's the next layer. Then an entire 8-ounce package of shredded cheese. You can use cheddar, cheddar jack, Colby jack. I use that because that's what I had on hand. I do pour the egg mixture over and then take my whisk and try to smush it all down. You're going to cover and refrigerate this overnight. The next morning, I preheat my oven to 350. It should look like this. The eggs have absorbed into the bread and everything. In my oven, this bakes in about 45 minutes. It might take up to 60 in yours. This one is easy and delicious. I love oatmeal. I eat it 6 days a week, so we have 4 different recipes for y'all. I have made this both with quick cook oats and also with old-fashioned rolled oats. I have never tried it with steel cut oats. You use a little bit of brown sugar. You can also use a replacement like a Splenda, and you're also going to use some applesauce. That'll keep it a little bit healthy. The original recipe calls for raisins, but I actually have more craisins, so I'm going to use those today. And you need some regular baking ingredients like baking powder, melted butter, an egg, some milk, and then the other thing that I do that's different from the original recipe is I like a little cinnamon. And you also need some walnuts, only about a tablespoon, and I'm sure you could substitute any nut or leave them out. So I went and got my bag out of the freezer. I'm going to measure out a whopping 1 tablespoon. The measurements on the screen are for an 8 by 8, so you would double it for a 9 by 13. For the small pan, I mix 2 cups of quick cook oats with a 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar, about 1/3 cup of raisins or craisins, and I end up using more, a teaspoon of baking powder, a dash of cinnamon, and the tablespoon of chopped walnuts, which you can leave them out. You mix the dry, then you mix the wet ingredients. In a small bowl or a Pyrex cup, I mix together 1.5 cups of milk, a 1/2 cup of applesauce, 2 tablespoons of melted butter, 1 beaten egg, combine with the wet with the dry, put in a greased 8 by 8 pan, and like I said, I end up using more craisins or raisin. That's just personal preference. You're going to bake this at 375 for about 20 minutes. It might be a little jiggly in the middle, but it'll set up. Just needs to cool a few minutes and then it won't be wiggly in the middle. Baked oatmeal. I cut this into 9 squares and then I'll take 1 or 2 out and heat it in the microwave for my breakfast. I also do a steel cut oats. I like to cook it in my little crock pot or West Bin. One of my favorite ways to have oatmeal is to do some steel cut oats in the crock pot. It is not even a recipe. It's super easy. You can use a regular crock pot. I would probably spray it. I use this little West Bin slow cooker because it's a great size for us. You simply combine 4 cups of water, 1 cup of steel cut oats, and 1 to 2 cups of your choice of dried fruit. I usually use craisins, cherries. Occasionally, if I have apricots or plums, I will add those. You mix them all together, cook them on low in the crock pot until they're done. A lot of these recipes say they're overnight. That never works for me, at least in this little cooker, because it's a thin cooker on a griddle. Mine are usually done in about 2 to 3 hours. Spray your crock pot, add 4 cups of water, 1 cup of steel cut oats, 1 to 2 cups of chopped fruit. I use craisins and chopped cherries. It'll be very liquidy. About halfway through, at least in my West Bin, I need to stir it so it doesn't burn. The finished product I store in the refrigerator and then scoop out however much I want, microwave it, and have it for breakfast. One of the very first videos we ever shared on our channel is for an overnight blueberry oats. I'll leave a link to both the recipe and the original video. As a quick recap, I just mixed some old-fashioned oats. I also add some dry muesli. You can add flax or chia. You'll need some honey, some cinnamon, some plain non-fat yogurt, some vanilla, and some almond milk. And I add fresh blueberries at the end. So I just mix it all up and put it in a big container and stick it in the refrigerator overnight. You can eat it cold, or sometimes I heat it up and then add more blueberries. The last oatmeal recipe is a Swiss oats. This one you mix up and cook on the stovetop. You use 1 cup of rolled oats, a couple of teaspoons of orange juice, or you could use some juice and zest from an orange, some cinnamon, about a half a teaspoon, or I use a little more, and some dried cherries. I order this big bag from Sam's Club online, so I always have them in the house. You mix up the dry ingredients really well, then add some milk, about 2 cups. Combine that. You're going to cover it and let it soak. Put this in the refrigerator overnight or all day. Mine's only going to be a few hours. It may not soak all up, but we're going to cook it on the stovetop until it's thick. I put it in a saucepan for about 5 to 10 minutes on low till it looks like this. Now we have 2 scone recipes for you. The first is a basic blueberry scone using dried blueberries. We also have a recipe video for this, and I'll leave a link. The main thing about making scones is I always freeze my butter and I grate it in. The recipe calls for sifting the dry ingredients. I just use my fine mesh strainer to mix up 1 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 cup of white sugar, 1/8 a teaspoon of salt, and you sift or mix all these ingredients together using a strainer. You need 5 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I always leave it in the freezer until I'm ready to use it. The recipe called for using a pastry cutter, but I used a handheld grater. Then you put in 1/2 cup of dried blueberries or any other kind of dried fruit or raisin, 1/2 cup of milk. I used 1/2 and 1/2. It does make it a little richer. Then add the milk to the sour cream and add that. Then I stick my dough in the bowl in the freezer for about 30 minutes and then take it out, put it out on a pastry mat, form a big thick round, and then cut it into 8 pie-shaped wedges. I mixed up an egg wash of 1 beaten egg with a little bit of 1/2 and 1/2, and then I brushed that on the tops and then sprinkled a packet or 2 of some turbinado or raw sugar on the top. Transfer to a cookie sheet either lined with parchment paper or a silpat. Bake in a 400-degree oven about 10 to 15 minutes for some easy blueberry scones. If you want scones on steroids, these are for you. These are chocolate cherry pecan scones. I saw this recipe being made on a Food Network show called The Kitchen, and I love a scone, and I love cherries and chocolate. These things are loaded. We're going to mix up the dry ingredients, some flour, sugar, baking powder, baking soda, and some salt, and then in a separate bowl we will mix up the wet ingredients, which is sour cream and egg. We will add, this is a 1/2 cup each of dried cherries, golden raisins, chocolate chips, and chopped pecans, and then we will grate this butter. I'm fixing to stick it right back in the freezer into the dry ingredients, mix them all together, put them on my cookie sheet, which is lined with my seal pat, top them with some turbinado sugar, and bake them at 400, I think for about 15 minutes. I will leave a link to this recipe. My husband, bless his heart, calls scones fancy biscuits. If you've not been here before, Tim's food love language is a biscuit. Mine is chocolate, so these are a wonderful combination. You mix the dry ingredients, 2 cups of all-purpose flour with 1/3 cup of sugar, a teaspoon of kosher salt, a teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. Mix all that together. Then in a separate bowl, beat 1 large egg and combine it with 1/2 cup of sour cream. After that's well combined, then you add in all the mix-ins. It's 1/2 cup each of chopped pecans, dried cherries, chocolate chips, and golden raisins. Be sure to stick around to see what I would do differently next time. Once the mix-ins are added with the wet ingredients, you've got a beautiful batter. I'm by no means an expert scone maker, but I have found through trial and error that what works best for me is to keep a stick of butter in the freezer, take it out and use a grater and grate it in. Be sure to get it all out of your box grater, and then I start mixing it by hand. It just works best for me. If the butter is frozen, you want to get what they call a coarse or pea-sized consistency. Once the dry mixture and the butter looks like little crumbs, then it's time to add the wet mixture. And again, I mix some of it with my hands, some of it with a spoon. Scones to me, just like homemade biscuits, is just something, it's more of a touch or a feel thing. You just work it. You don't want to overwork the dough, but you want to work it until everything is combined without using a mixer or anything heavy. So I'm just going to keep working it with my hands. It is a wet, sticky dough, so I did have to stop a couple of times and clean my hands up. It's still not completely mixed up at this point. There's still a lot of loose crumbs, if you'll see in the bottom, but I got my pastry mat out and tried to just pour it out and then finish it and start working it into a round. The recipe from Food Network The Kitchen said to make it at least an inch thick, so I started just trying to round it and pat it and make it as thick as I could. The original recipe from Food Network said to cut them into 6 wedges. Next time I would probably do 8 or even 10. Be careful not to do what I did a couple of years ago and cut through the silicone mat with a knife. It can be done. I do have my oven preheating to 400 degrees. The original recipe calls for sprinkling each scone lightly with some white sugar. I much prefer to use turbinado sugar, so that's what I did for ours. The scones came out of the oven and they smelled delicious. Tim and I both gave these scones 2 thumbs up. They were more delicious than they looked and smelled. The only thing I would do different next time, and I will make them again, is I won't use the raisins. I will probably cut back on the amounts of the chips, the cherries, and the pecans because they were loaded. These were a big hit here, a definite keeper. Up next, an easy egg bake in the Instant Pot, or you could probably do it in the oven. I'm going to use what I have today. I've got 6 eggs set to beat with a 1/4 cup of milk and some Nature's seasoning or Mrs. Dash or whatever kind of seasoning you like. I'll add a little of this. I may add a little Trader Joe's onion salt. Beat these together. Because I have it. 1/4 cup each of diced meats, and I do have what she recommended, which was ham, turkey sausage, and bacon. Bacon bits out of a big bag from Sam's. She said to use 2 slices of like American or cheddar cheese. Rather than opening slices, I had the ends of 2 bags, some Monterey Jack and some cheddar, so I'm going to add those. And then she said to add whatever vegetables you like. Onions, peppers, tomatoes, maybe spinach. I have mushrooms today, and we like those. I'm not a fan of bell peppers or tomatoes. If you've been here before, you know that. Mix this all together and pour it in the pan and get it started in the Instant Pot. Should be plenty of room. I probably could have added something else. I don't think things are going to rise in the Instant Pot. It's not an oven. It's a wet, steamed environment. I'm going to cover it loosely with foil. Then we will cook it for 15 minutes on high. My Instant Pot is a 6 quart, so I have 1 cup of water in the bottom, the trivet, and then I lower the sling with the egg bake on it. Pressure cook or manual. Mine's actually on 15 minutes. You can go up or down to get to it. Remember, with an Instant Pot, there's no set. You just let it go and it starts. We'll start a timer. We'll see how long it takes to come to pressure. After it comes to pressure, it cooks 15 minutes on high. We will let it NPR, which is natural pressure release, which basically means leave it alone. Mine took 9.5, 10 minutes to come to pressure, so you have to remember to add that in as well as the time it takes to NPR. It's been 19 minutes. It's still natural pressure releasing, so we're going to help it along a little bit. It's almost gone. Somebody's ready to eat. Oh, you can't see it. Look at that. It's all covered up. You can't see it. Does he have good balancing skills? Got a little water on the top. Got a little water on the top, don't it? Be careful. Got a little water on the top, which is why we covered it, to keep the condensation from making it wet. And the big revealing, et voila. Et voila. Little egg bake we're going to turn out and cut. Did I spray it well enough?
It's a bunt.
Bunt.
Not a bunt.
Who watched my big fat Greek wedding? Bunt. Awesome. And next we have some fun and easy mini cinnamon donut muffins. The recipe with ingredients is linked below, but you'll need flour, baking powder, salt, nutmeg, cinnamon, a little oil, sugar, an egg, and some milk. Combine the dry ingredients, 1 3/4 cup all-purpose flour, 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon each of salt, nutmeg, and cinnamon. Then in a separate bowl, you'll take 3/4 cup of white sugar and add 3/4 cup of milk and 1 egg. Once the wet ingredients are combined, make a well in the center of the dry and combine it very gently just till it's combined. Fill your sprayed mini muffin pans and then bake at 350 for 13 to 15 minutes. You'll need to melt a half a cup of butter and mix up the cinnamon sugar. Then when the muffins come out, immediately to turn them out when they're hot, dip them in the butter and roll them in the sugar for mini cinnamon donut muffins. Once a year at Christmas, we make these very decadent overnight sticky buns. For this recipe, you'll need 1 stick of butter, some chopped pecans, 24 frozen bread rolls, I use the Rhodes brand, 1 small package of cook and serve butterscotch pudding, cinnamon, and brown sugar. Take the stick of butter and butter the bottom, the sides, and the entire inside of a bundt pan. Then in a separate bowl, we're going to mix 3/4 cup packed brown sugar and the dried cook and serve butterscotch pudding. Don't use instant, it won't work. Then add 2 teaspoons of cinnamon and mix all that together. To the buttered bundt pan, you're going to take the chopped pecans and sprinkle them around as well as you can. This makes the topping. Then you're going to start layering the frozen Rhodes rolls. There's 24, and you're going to intersperse the pudding mixture all throughout. Cut the rest of the stick of butter into small pieces and dot the tops of the rolls. Cover with a clean dish towel, leave on the counter overnight, 8 to 10 hours. Then the next morning, once they've risen, preheat your oven to 350, put it on a cookie sheet, and bake at 350 for 35 to 40 minutes. You do need to shield it towards the end to keep it from browning. Carefully, hot out of the oven, invert it onto a platter, remove the bundt pan, the topping is on top. It's ooey gooey and delicious, and this is our Christmas treat every year. This is an easy overnight croissant casserole where you use either 5 mini croissants or 2 to 3 large sizes. You make this in a 9x9 that will spray. You'll also need eggs, half and half, whole milk, brown sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla. Start off by tearing the croissants into small pieces in a large bowl. Then we're going to mix up the custard, which is 4 eggs, 3/4 cups each, half and half, and whole milk. 1/4 cup of brown sugar, cinnamon and vanilla to taste. You mix that up and then pour it over the croissant pieces and let it soak in. Transfer the mixture to a greased 9x9 casserole and cover and refrigerate overnight. The next morning, preheat your oven to 350. Bake it for about 45 minutes for the small pan. I do cover it with foil after about 30. We serve this with just some powdered sugar on top. The original recipe was doubled for a 9x13, so check our website for that recipe. Our last recipe is a huge family favorite for apple dumplings. The ingredients you'll need are 2 sticks of butter, 2 cans of crescent rolls, a 9x13 pan, 2 Granny Smith apples, white sugar, cinnamon, vanilla, and 12 ounces of Mountain Dew. I start off by melting the 2 sticks of butter over low on the stove. I'm going to prepare the apples. We're going to peel 2 Granny Smiths and then core them and cut each apple into 8 pieces. We need 16 sections of apples to roll in the 16 crescent rolls. I've taken about a tablespoon or 2 of water and added it to the apples. We're going to throw them in the microwave for a couple minutes just to soften them up so it won't take quite as long for them to cook in the oven. The butter has melted. I've added the sugar. Mix this together and then kind of bring it to a thick sauce to pour over the apples. And you take a 12-ounce can of Mountain Dew, or in my case, 12 ounces from a 2 liter, and pour it around the edges. Preheated 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes. These apple dumplings are always a hit wherever we take them. We hope some of these recipes are something you'd like to make at your house. Thanks for watching, y'all. Take care, have a wonderful and truly blessed day.